Hello, Good Shepherd and Saints Francis and John. I'm Deacon Mike Lynch with Good Shepherd Church. This week we prepare with a gospel message for the 27th Sunday of Ordinary Time. A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to the chief priests and the elders of the people, "Hear another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard, put a hedge around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a tower. Then he leased it to tenants and went on a journey. When vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to obtain his produce. But the tenants seized the servants, and one they beat, another they killed, and a third they stoned. Again he sent other servants, more numerous than the first ones, but they treated them in the same way. Finally, he sent his son to them, thinking, 'They will respect my son.' But when the tenants saw the son, they said to one another, 'This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and acquire his inheritance.' They seized him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. What will the owner of the vineyard do to those tenants when he comes?" They answered him, "He will put those wretched men to a wretched death and lease this vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at the proper times." Jesus said to them, "Did you never read in the Scriptures, 'The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. By the Lord has this been done, and it is wonderful in our eyes.' Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people that will produce its fruit." As with many of his other parables and stories, Jesus uses images and examples in this story that the people of his day could understand, such as agricultural images like the vineyard in this parable of the landowner and the unfaithful tenants whom he left to care for his vineyard. It's also worth noting that the term "the vineyard of the Lord" was a familiar image of the nation of Israel that can be found in the Old Testament, making this story more meaningful to those who heard it. And when you think about what happens in this story, the servants whom the landowner sent to obtain his produce can be interpreted as the prophets of the Old Testament who came to speak on God's behalf to his people, and particularly to their leaders. Many of those prophets, like the servants in the story, encountered rejection by the leaders of Israel and even death. But also consider that God, like the landowner, began with trust in human beings to do his work among his people. God is also patient enough to send prophets multiple times, as the landowner is patient in sending servants to get what is owed to him. And finally, he sends his son, who is mistreated and killed. Clearly an image of Jesus, the Messiah and Son of the Father, whose ministry and teachings result in his rejection and his death by crucifixion. All of which Jesus tells the chief priests and the elders was alluded to in Psalm 118, which he quotes, "The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." Jesus is the stone rejected by those who should be building up the people of God. Yet, by the will of the Father, he becomes the cornerstone of his church. The story as told in Matthew's Gospel is aimed at the unfaithful leaders of Israel, represented by the tenants who are supposed to care for God's vineyard, that is, God's people. But the leaders whom Jesus was condemning demand obedience from the people of God, without also living as strong examples of faith in God on their own part. The story has its application to you and me too. Jesus is reminding us that his Father and ours has entrusted each of us with gifts to be used for the good of others and the glory of God. And the greatest of these gifts is Jesus himself, whose life and teachings we're called to embrace and never to reject. Here are some family activities relating to this story to consider this week. Discuss this parable as a family, and then this week focus on making your daily activity being a parent or a child, at your employment or your school, or with a friend or even someone you don't know. An activity that produces the fruits of your faith. Sometimes just kindness or a smile can help someone feel love and acceptance. And don't forget that we never know when people in our lives are struggling with insecurities or loneliness. Let God's love and mercy move you to share His priceless gifts. God bless. See you at Mass.